Today we're going to add our third and final upgrade to our crossbow tower. So first we're going to add the button in our upgrade frame. So let's add a new sprite. We'll load the pierce upgrade button. Then let's go to the collision polygon. Go ahead and set that to bounding box now so that'll be fixed for later. Then we can close the image editor. We're going to name this pierce upgrade. The position will be 572, 24. The size will be 32 by 32. The initial visibility will be invisible. And then we just need our two text boxes. So let's insert a text box right underneath it. This will be called Pierce Info. Position here is 556, 46. Our size is 32 by 32. Text can be 1. The horizontal alignment should be centered. And the last is our cost for our pierce. So let's insert another text box right underneath there. We will call that pierce cost. Position is 672 by 32. The size is going to be 128 by 32. The text here is going to be pierce : and everything else should be the default. So now all three of our text boxes should line up. Our three info buttons should line up centered underneath each of the boxes that are holding the upgrade buttons for each of our upgrades. So now we need to add in the code for each of those things we just added. So let's head over to event sheet 1. So same thing at start of layout, we need an info and a cost. So I'm going to copy and paste those. Double click, go back, and I'm going to get my pierce info and pierce cost. So let's do pierce cost. And pierce info. Those two are set. Going through my other code, I'm going to need to modify enemy control, but we'll wait to do that until the end. While we're here, let's go ahead and go to turret control and fix our arrow's travel distance. So right now, we're destroying the arrow whenever the bullet distance traveled is greater than or equal to 100. But we've had upgrades put on our tower that allow its range to be more than that. So instead, we need to tell each arrow how long we want it to last. So that should be handled whenever the arrow is fired. Right here's when we fire our arrow. So we want to be able to save that somewhere on the arrow. Right now we don't have anything that could save that, so let's create an instance variable on our arrow that we will call range. We'll just leave the initial value to 0 because we're going to set a value as soon as the arrow is created. So hit OK, and now we have range that is a number with a value of 0. So here, right after we've created our arrow, we'll add another action. We want our arrow set value to the range, and that should be equal to the crossbow turret dot range. So whatever the current crossbow that fired its range is, that will be put into the arrow's range value. We'll put that right here, right underneath firing the arrow. Let's go ahead and add in our upgrade controls at the bottom. So I'm going to take my pierce cost and pierce info, copy those, paste them to the bottom here where we set everything else to blank. We also need an invisible action for our button. So I'm going to copy and paste one of those. And I'm going to go back and change it to the pierce upgrade button. Then of course I need to do the opposite of that, so I'm going to copy that and paste it here. So my pierce upgrade is going to be set to visible instead. And we need to set our pierce cost and pierce info values. We'll put those right under rate of fire. Unlike the range and rate of fire, where that was a variable already created inside of the turret behavior, there's not anything for pierce, so we're going to need to create that on our own. So I'm going to go to the crossbow object, and I'm going to add an instance variable, and that's going to be pierce, and the default value is 1 so that it will pop exactly one object. Then we can set our pierce cost to pierce : space Then outside of the quotation marks, ampersand, crossbow dot pierce times 180. So we'll do 180 for each value of pierce. And then pierce info is just the value of our variable, so that would be crossbow dot pierce. And click done. Then the last thing to add in this section is when we touch the pierce upgrade button. Since it's mostly the same, I'm going to copy this entire event, just click by the green arrow, and then paste a copy, and then I'm just going to change the things that need to be changed. So instead of the rate of fire upgrade button, I'm going to do the pierce upgrade button. We still want to pick the crossbow that we are trying to upgrade. Instead of money being related to our rate of fire, we're going to change that to crossbow dot pierce times 180. I'm going to copy that value so that I can use it again. That will be what I subtract from money. So I'll paste that. And the same thing for sell value. I'm going to paste that right in front of the times 0.8. Instead of setting the turret rate, I'm going to go back and I'm going to add to my pierce value just one. The money label and the sell label both get updated. Instead of updating my rate of fire information, I'm going to go get my pierce information, copy those, and paste those, and that should complete that part. Everything should be working now, except we've never actually implemented the pierce anywhere in the game. So I'm going to collapse my upgrade controls, and instead go to enemy control, where we control shooting the enemies. So here's where we will implement all of our arrow pierce code. But first we need to add the pierce value to each arrow that's fired. So just like we added range to our arrow, we're going to take our arrow and add a pierce value. We'll leave the initial value to 0 because we're going to create that as soon as it's fired again. So I'm going to copy and paste my range action. And instead of changing my range, I'm going to change pierce. Instead of being crossbow turret.range, I'm going to make it crossbow.pierce. So now we've copied the value from the crossbow's pierce upgrade value to the arrow. So the arrow now has a pierce number. That should be everything inside of turret control. We don't need to change anything about the balloon moving on the path, but when the arrow has a collision with the balloon, we don't necessarily want the arrow to be destroyed right away. Instead, we want to add a new sub-event for when the arrow compare instance variable pierce is less than or equal to 0. You should be able to put equal to 0, but it's best to use an inequality just in case somehow the number becomes negative. And this is when we want our arrow to be destroyed. We want to add another condition that the arrow compare instance variable pierce is greater than 0. That means it still has something left to pierce. And I want to copy that and paste it to the other one where the HP is greater than 1. This is where we will take our arrow and we will subtract from pierce the value of 1. We'll also want to do that here. Since it's in both places, you might think to put that on this one anytime the arrow has a collision with the balloon. But then we couldn't check to see if that arrow was one with 0 before we took away hit points or destroyed a balloon. For the same reason, we should also move our money commands to each of the sub-events and remove them from the parent event. Assuming everything is correct, we should be able to test it and have it work. I'm going to temporarily set my money to a much higher value so that I can afford these upgrades at the beginning to test them. So I'm going to build a crossbow, give it some pierce and some range. We can see that the arrow now goes through and hits exactly 3 balloons.